Well, it is the most talked about trade in WNBA history, or maybe the only talked about trade in WNBA history. But of course, this one is actually worthy of all of the grading and analysis, that being Joe Biden's swap of Brittany Griner from a Russian work camp for Victor Bout, a Russian gun dealer convicted of arming American enemies and conspiring to kill American citizens. And like any trade, there are three pieces to analyze: what we got, what we gave up, and what we left on the table. What we got is a woman with a comfortable six-figure salary for playing basketball in a league that operates at a loss because so few people actually watch it, an opportunity afforded by the subsidy of the men's league, but an opportunity for which she is still ungrateful, or at least ungrateful to the country that provides it, as she advocated for the WNBA ending the national anthem before games in 2020. But because she's a woman married to a woman, and because she has the victimized skin tone despite all the actual privilege she enjoys, the Biden administration insists she represents the best of us.
She represents the best America, the best about America. It is across the board, everything about her.
She represents the best of America.
I don't know about the best of America, but certainly the best of our female dunk attempts.
Brittany Griner, a dunk for us here live. Oh, we'll give her another shot.
There are some hateful people who question Griner's true gender. I do not. I've never seen a more conclusive display of female athleticism. So that is what we got: nearly 7 feet that still struggle to put the ball through the net. What we gave up is Victor Bout, a Russian arms dealer nicknamed the Merchant of Death, for his career of supplying weapons to those looking to deliver it. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Bout moved to the UAE and started a cargo company, which he used to move the military supplies of former Soviet states. These weapons went to rebels, militants, and terrorists around the world. Bout was accused of selling weapons to Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, as well as Rwandan militants. He came into U.S. custody starting in 2008, when DEA agents posing as Colombian revolutionaries interested in buying weapons arranged a meeting with him in Thailand. When the undercover feds told him the weapons could be used to kill American pilots, Bout responded, quote, "We have the same enemy." So, just like The Hangover Part 2, Bout was deceptively picked up in Bangkok. He was extradited to the U.S. He was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison in 2012, where he's been ever since. As Jesse Kelly put it, we traded a WNBA player for a guy who can actually shoot, which leaves our last point for consideration: what we left on the table. Brittany Griner, of course, was not the only American citizen detained in Russia on what many believe to be flimsy charges. Paul Whelan is a former cybersecurity worker and former Marine Corps administrative clerk who visited Moscow in 2018, he says, to attend a colleague and fellow Marine's wedding. Russian authorities arrested him after they say he was caught red-handed receiving a USB drive full of Russian classified information. He was convicted on espionage charges in 2020 and sentenced to 16 years in prison, which he is still serving as he and his family maintain his innocence. And this is not to imply guilt. The facts of his Russian charges and conviction are not very specific or clear, but there is one piece of Whelan's Marine Corps career I just don't see commonly mentioned. Whelan was given a bad conduct discharge from the Marines in 2008 following a court-martial related to larceny, as in theft. He was convicted of attempting to steal $10,000 and related lesser offenses that included wrongful use of somebody else's social security number. And to be completely serious for a moment, just because I make fun of Brittany Griner or just because I mention a military misconduct issue in Whelan's past does not mean that either deserves to rot in a Russian prison for it. I certainly don't want ideological policing to be the basis on which we offer help to American citizens overseas, nor does misconduct from a decade and a half ago imply misconduct today, or that the Russian penalty for that misconduct is correct. It just means that we have choices to make. With limited resources and limited leverage, how we negotiate is a matter of strategic importance. And so it's fair to question, with these three pieces in play, Griner, Whelan, and Bout, did we get the best possible deal for both these detained citizens and their families? as well as our country and the American people as a whole. The administration insists that such analysis is unnecessary because this was the only option available. Griner for boot is all that was possible. Take it or leave it. And so it was necessary to take it.
Our choices was Brittany or no one at all. Bringing home one American or no American at all.
This was not a choice between Paul or Brittany. The only deal we could secure was Brittany for Mr. Boot.
This was not a choice about which American to bring home. The choice was one or none.
This was not a choice of which American to bring home. For totally illegitimate reasons, Russia is treating Paul's case differently than Brittany's.
Whether that's even true, there are some conflicting signs, but even if it is true, it's a point that grants Russia setting the terms. It's a point that grants American weakness in negotiation. Oh, these are just the terms that they gave us. What can you do? What you can do is push better terms on them. And even if it is the best deal that we could get right now, is it actually a good deal? Because, well, of course, we should work to bring our people home. We're not just negotiating for their safety. We are negotiating for American safety in general when we consider releasing a guy with a history of attacking it, or at least arming those who do. And when asked if Victor Boot will pose a threat to America again, White House National Security Advisor John Kirby said that's up to Boot now.
Do you believe that Victor Boot will now once again pose a threat to the United States and to Americans?
Well, that's going to be up to Mr. Boot.
Are you concerned about it?
We did an assessment before we made this trade. Again, this is going to be a decision for Mr. Boot to make.
Okay, but it wasn't a decision for Boot to make. Just a few days ago, when he was still in prison, we voluntarily made that decision up to Boot. There is no reason we had to do that, and perhaps a national defense strategy stronger than it's up to our enemies if they attack us or not is a worthy consideration. But was this actually the only option available to the White House? Were there other choices on the table, and this one wasn't just imposed, but actually selected at the expense of another option? Did Joe Biden actually choose Griner over Whelan? There's the repeated party line, and then there's a conflicting report. When news of the swap broke on Thursday morning, NBC published a story that originally said the Kremlin gave the White House the choice of either Griner or Whelan or none, as in pick one but not both, contradicting the repeated White House claim that the choice was Griner or none, and Whelan was not an option. That report was then stealth edited, as in NBC changed it without providing any note to explain the change, and the updated version of the story then repeated the party line. The White House choice was either Griner or no one. Only when caught and asked for comment did NBC later provide that editor's note, which now says an earlier version of the story misstated the choice Biden was given. There was no choice between Griner or Whelan. No explanation for how NBC got that wrong, though, or what source may have misinformed them. And of course, the stealth edit, or at least the less than clear deletion of key details from a story, is a recurrence at NBC in recent weeks. Recall national NBC reporter Miguel Almaguer remained suspended for reporting key details about the Paul Pelosi attack story, that Paul opened the door upon police arrival, that Paul did not seek police assistance and instead returned back to his attacker upon police arrival, and that Paul spent some 30 minutes with his attacker with no injury inflicted. Immediately after that report aired, NBC nuked the story, mysteriously saying it didn't meet their reporting standards, but not explaining how. And the reporter hasn't appeared on air or said anything publicly since, despite his report being largely corroborated by a local reporter's separate investigation. And sure, it might be cynical to believe that these stories have anything to do with one another. Why blame a scheme when you could just blame a mistake? It could just be sloppy reporting, nothing more. And yeah, it could, but NBC's characterization isn't the only piece of evidence that suggests the White House had a choice in the Griner and Whelan negotiations. Whelan's Russian lawyer suggests that too. As part of that same NBC report, and a detail that remains in the current corrected version of it, Whelan's Russian lawyer Vladimir Zherebenkov says that choosing Griner appeared, quote, more humane because she is a woman and an Olympic champion, while Whelan is in the military and it's easier for him to be in custody. Chosen by whom, though? Maybe he means chosen by the Russians, which could be consistent with the White House line, but that's not the side of the negotiations that this lawyer is on, and it would require us to believe that being humane is the primary Russian goal in these negotiations and not the continued humiliation of their Western rivals. Though, of course, they could say one as a front for the other, and perhaps that is what happened. And perhaps that is what Whelan's Russian lawyer means, that the Russians selected Griner, not the White House. In fairness, that would be consistent with what Whelan's family is saying, and I have to think that they know the details of the case. Speaking with another NBC reporter, Whelan's family says, quote, "The Biden administration made the right decision to bring Miss Griner home and to make the deal that was possible rather than waiting for one that wasn't going to happen." The implication being Paul Whelan was never available in this round of negotiation. So it could just be botched reporting by NBC, plus a correction that was also botched, but NBC's coverage isn't the only evidence of reporters crafting their stories to suit White House needs in this case either. According to a CBS reporter, that network learned last Thursday, a full week prior, of the Griner for boot deal, but agreed to a White House request not to report it because officials expressed concern about the integrity of the deal and the safety of the Americans, as in the safety of those Americans, Griner and Whelan, to specify, not the safety of Americans in general, who, of course, Victor Boot now gets to decide whether or not to conspire to attack again. They withheld the truth to keep us safe. Even if the boot threat never materializes, that is a philosophy that guarantees danger. Ultimately, even if it wasn't a choice of which American to bring home, as the president said, if it was in fact Brittany Griner or nobody, well, nobody was still an option, and for many, a comparatively attractive one, which is likely exactly why they concealed this deal until it was done. Public pushback could have undone it, and not because of hate for Griner, at least uniquely, but because the cost of returning her was the release of a danger to the country. To say that this deal was the only one available is to grant the premise that this administration is incapable of winning for both the detained American citizen and the American people overall. That is a point I'd expect from the president's critics, not a point of promotion for himself. Besides, it wasn't the only option. We didn't even try our greatest piece of leverage. Has anybody offered Putin free WNBA season tickets? If the star of the league represents the best of America, well then, of course, that's an offer that represents the best of us too. And best of all, there's plenty of viewing room in the arena. You don't even have to bump elbows to enjoy our emerging national pastime of watching Olympic level almost dunks. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Gab. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.